Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Milwaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we explore the life and legacy of politician and civil rights activist Vel Phillips. Then we'll meet the state's first Black Miss Wisconsin.
I never thought, especially even going into competition week, that my life would change so much or that I'd be able to have such a large influence in such a short amount of time. And so I have made my younger self proud.
Plus, we'll learn about Milwaukee's first professional women's basketball team.
We opened the door, we kicked it open, and we kept it open and have kept it open through our play, through our coaching, through our careers.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. Today's show celebrates women who have been the first Black Miss Wisconsin and the first in professional women's basketball. We'll start with the many firsts of Vel Phillips. She was the first Black person and first woman to serve on the Milwaukee Common Council, the first Black elected statewide office holder in Wisconsin, and the first Black person elected to the Democratic Party's National Committee. From pioneering open housing legislation to serving as Wisconsin's Secretary of State, Phillips influenced countless crucial moments of our history. She died in 2018 at the age of 94. Writer Barbara Miner dove into Phillips' history and the impact for an article in Milwaukee Magazine. She joins me now to share more about Phillips' life and legacy. We're talking about a very important woman today, Vel Phillips. And obviously a lot of people, especially locally, are familiar with Vel's accomplishments in her political career. But can you share more about her early years and her background?
Very complicated. And Val was a complicated person. I mean, her very early background, she was born in Milwaukee, raised here in Milwaukee, but her parents were part of what was then sort of the established African-American community. Her father was a small businessman, restaurant, garage owner. So Val grew up in relative, and I say that very loosely, relative comfort. And in fact, she talks about in her very early years when she went door to door with the League of Women Voters and was just horrified at some of the conditions. And she said it broke her heart. And of those early years, her mother was clearly her strongest influence. And one of the things that is so associated with Val is something her mother always said, which was dream big. And Val took that and other lessons from her mother, but took that to heart.
Vel has a ton of accomplishments. You know, we can't list and talk about all of them in our conversation today, but her political career started, officially, shall we say, when she was 32 years old. She became the first woman and the first Black person on the Milwaukee Common Council. So can you share more context about the atmosphere and culture she was working in 1956?
Yes, the 1950s on some levels could as well be the 18th century in terms of how different it is from today. And I grew up in the 50s, younger, but it's hard, I think, sometimes to appreciate what that culture was like for women and for Black people, but particularly women. For instance, there was not the approval of oral contraceptives until the 1960s, I think. Betty Friedan's The Feminist Mystique was not until the 1960s. And interestingly, it wasn't until 1974, we're talking 22 years after Vel was first elected, that women could have their own bank account or credit card. And so the 50s were a complicated decade, coming off of World War II. Economic prosperity in many ways, but the life for a lot of women and people of color was very different. And after the war, women were expected to go home and make babies.
And, you touched upon some of the atmosphere for women. and then for Black people. And Vel obviously has a lot of compounded discrimination that she had experienced long before, intersectionality had been a common word, right?
Exactly.
Can you share a little more about that? Because you had a conversation with her about what stood out to her the most about that.
Well, interestingly, I did a feature on Vel in 2005. Hard to believe that's almost 20 years ago. And I had the good fortune to really, I drove her around, we had interviews, we spent some time together. And I would go to events where she would be, like community brainstorming, where she would be moderating. And we'd have lunch and, conversations. And at one point, I asked her, because she was known as the first woman, the first African American, I said, well, what was the hardest breakthrough? And initially, she just kind of, thought about it and just said, it was difficult, so to speak. And then a week or two later, at the community brainstorming, she comes back to me. She says, I've been thinking about that, and I really want to clarify. And then she talked about Shirley Chisholm, who is a African-American woman legislator from New York, who also ran for president in the 60s. And she was friends with Vel. I mean, there weren't that many women African-American politicians, and so they all knew each other. And Vel said, Shirley and I talked about this, and you're Black. Of course you're Black. And people know you're Black, and they don't forget that. But you're also a woman. But usually once I was in a position, they kind of forgot that I was a Black woman. She said, but they never, ever, ever forgot I was a woman.
So powerful, right? And sad that that's the takeaway.
Yes. Although interestingly, misogyny was ever present from the moment she stepped foot into the Common Council chambers. A lot of stories there. But it was really the issue of her being an African-American politician. That was the issue that really led to sort of concerns about her personal safety and the safety of her children. So while one was ever present and aggravating, it did not rise to the level of physically threatening her, and that wasn't true around the open housing marches.
Right. Let's talk about the marches. Obviously, it's one of her key legacies is the open housing legislation. And I feel like most people know the marches and have a certain snapshot in their head, especially if they weren't alive during that time. Like we see the same kind of handful of photographs, right? But Vel was trying to act on this long before the marching tactic became enacted, right?
Oh, she was the first person to introduce the open housing legislation. And it was in 1962. We're talking, 5 years before the open housing marches. In 1962, she first introduced open housing legislation, which would prohibit discrimination against African Americans in terms of renting and buying homes, which is very common at the time. Open discrimination. And I believe it was 15-1. She was the only person who voted in favor of it. And there were years where it wasn't even discussed. She would bring up the resolution, no discussion, there'd be a vote. She would be the only person in support of the legislation.
And then eventually down the road in 67, she throws herself behind the tactic championed by Father James Groppe here and the local NAACP Youth Council, which was the public demonstrations. And I feel like this is lost in some of the snapshots, how extensive it was, how dramatic.
Well, in the mid-60s is when just everything exploded. And 1967 nationally was sort of this national unrest. There were, uprisings in Newark, Detroit. They called the troops into Detroit, Lyndon B. Johnson. And Father Groppe, shortly before that, had started the demonstrations for open housing. Groppe and the Youth Council were sort of in the streets. Val was working with the politicians on the legislation. And Groppe, they came to Val and said, listen, we want to take this up as an issue. They'd been doing other issues around school desegregation, the Eagles Club, and their discriminatory practices. And they said, Val, we want to take this up. And Val said, go right ahead. She wasn't always out there in the demonstrations because she was acutely aware of the different roles at times. But it was in 67 when things just went kind of crazy. I don't quite know how to describe it, but that was when, in line with all the different uprisings in Newark, Detroit, Milwaukee had its own. And what started it and how and why, there might be some differences of opinion. But what is known is that Mayor Meyer immediately in sort of classic Milwaukee German fashion, shut down the entire city. Mail service was suspended. People were not allowed to leave their homes. It was just a complete and total shutdown. And the demonstrations had started before that. Things shut down. Some other things happened. But the bottom line is that after that shutdown was lifted, the demonstrations began again. And this is when Grappi and the commandos decided to go across the viaduct into the south side. And that night that they decided to do that, they were met on the south side. It was just as ugly as anything Milwaukee has ever seen. Bricks, racial epithets, things being thrown at the demonstrators, go back to Africa, calling, Grappi a traitor, to his race. Just ugly, ugly, ugly. But the demonstrators were determined. So for 200 consecutive nights, because I think back to George Floyd in 2020, but I'm thinking here, and it was the summer.
Right.
Here we have 200 nights in the middle of a Milwaukee winter, and they kept marching. And then again, once and then national events intervened, because that spring in April, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And again, just uprisings and protests all around the city. And at that point, and I think to this day, it remains the largest civil rights demonstration in Milwaukee history. Well, needless to say, about 2 weeks afterwards, the federal open housing legislation passed, and finally, Milwaukee woke up to reality. Some new alder people had been elected, and finally, the open housing legislation passed.
As we know, Vel, we obviously identify her with Milwaukee, with Wisconsin, but her impact on the national stage is also really good too. And you go into her roles in the DNC both in 1958 and the 1960 conventions. Can you explain kind of how Vel set herself apart on the national scale here?
Well, it's fascinating. And again, a lot of it had to do with open housing. That's always been both locally and nationally her political marker, her main issue. But in 58, she was elected to the Democratic National Committee, first African-American woman. And then 2 years later, at the convention when Kennedy was nominated. So, not surprisingly, there was lots of discussion and floor fights over the platform. And there was a push for a strong civil rights platform as part of the Democratic Party platform. And you had your Southern Dems, the sort of segregationists, who said, oh, no, we can't adopt this civil rights platform. You're going to lose the South. This is government-enforced social equality. And they were adamantly opposed. And Val was on the committee, and one of the lessons here is don't ever get into a political fight with Val. She was so smart, and she always had a good response. So she says to the senator, well, how can you expect the world to, respect us if we don't even enforce equality here at home? But then more importantly, she said something that I think actually remains one of Val's enduring markers of her beliefs. And she said, listen, it's more important to do the right thing. Luckily, the civil rights platform carried the day, and Kennedy won the election because the Southern segregationists said, oh, no, you're going to lose the election if you adopt this. But they didn't.
You're listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski speaking with Barbara Miner about her Milwaukee Magazine article on Vel Phillips. So, Barbara, you mentioned that Vel always thought it's more important to do the right thing. And I think it's kind of a through line for Vel in that throughout her whole career and all the challenges she faced, like there's the resilience, there's the tenacity, there's the quiet leadership by example. And she was many things, obviously, including proud, but she kept her personal life quite private, right?
Yes. Understandably, as a politician and as a woman. But one of the things that I think it's really important to get into about Val, in terms of her do the right thing, to her dying day, she supported marriage equality. She supported a woman's right to choose. She supported LGBTQ. She supported, school desegregation. She strongly supported public schools and opposed the voucher program. You name an issue. She was a Bernie Sanders big supporter. You name an issue, and she came down on what, in hindsight, almost everyone recognizes was the right thing.
We, of course, have been talking about her local impact here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, but let's talk about kind of how we're finally giving her flowers. There's a statue at the state capitol and the Vel Phillips Plaza here in Milwaukee. So how are these public and accessible spaces designed to reflect her?
It is important, I think, that she's finally getting her due. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. And one of the things I discovered in this article and over time was how well she was known at the statewide level. I mean, I know her here in Milwaukee, but a dorm was named after her in Madison. The James Madison High School is now the Vel Phillips Memorial High School. She's well known around the state and in Madison. Why is she getting her due? Lots of different reasons. One, the 100th year. After a century, I think people take notice. But also there's an interesting story of what happened in Madison, because it was the George Floyd protests. COVID, George Floyd, that was a difficult time on many, many levels. And during one of the protests in Madison, and this had been true across the country of different statues and monuments being torn down. In the South, this was primarily Confederate segregationists. Well, in Madison, they tore down two statues. One was Lady Forward, who represents the state, motto, and the other was a Norwegian American who was an abolitionist. But interestingly, Michael Johnson, who's head of the Dane County Boys and Girls Club, he decided to go talk to the protesters. And that was a very smart move. Rather than just assuming they did what they did, why they did, he said, I'm going to talk to them. And he found that, beneath the rage, beneath the anger, beneath the confusion, they had a really, really valid point that there were absolutely no statues of people of color at the Capitol. And so Michael said, this is right. We should do something about it. So that began the campaign around the statue of Vel Phillips at the state capitol. And here in Milwaukee, Malele Coggs, the alderperson, has a lot to do with really making sure that Vel got her due. There was the renaming of 4th Street to the Vel R. Phillips Drive. And then there was this pretty dingy corner there at 4th in Wisconsin, and it was city-owned. It's like, what are we going to do with this? And ultimately, someone had the good sense to say, well, yeah, let's do a plaza, and let's name it after Vel.
What sticks out the most to you about Vel? Are there any insights you want to share or details or stories that didn't make it into the article?
Well, this is a personal story because it involves my mother. And Vel was very close to her mother. And I had my differences with my mother, but by the end, we were quite close. And it also underscored to me that Vel was a people person. So I remember once I wanted to interview her, but we couldn't find a quiet restaurant. Everything was downtown. And I said, Vel, my mom lives at the Astor Hotel, and they have a quiet little coffee shop. And she goes, your mom lives at the Astor? I've always wanted to see one of those apartments. Can I go see your apartment? I said, well, so I called my mom, and my mom's going like, Vel Phillips? Well, yeah, come on up. My mom was nervous because Val's pretty famous, and so they come up.
Let me clean first, right?
Yeah. Well, my mom kept it pretty clean house, so I knew my mom was a little nervous, and I'm going, well, it's an ask, Mom, but so we go up there. And there's a little bit of hi, Barbara's mother, hi, I'm Vel Phillips. Within about 2 minutes, these two older women are talking about their favorite solitaire card game. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I don't know, if Val suddenly saw the card table with the cards, but all of a sudden they were like best buddies.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for joining me today to share more about your piece on Vel Phillips. And we could talk about her for much longer, but thanks for what we talked about today.
Oh, no, thank you. And it's a homage to Vel. Thank you for letting more about her get out.
Barbara Miner is a writer and photographer here in Milwaukee. She wrote about Vel Phillips for Milwaukee Magazine in 2024, and that's when we spoke. Need some flexibility for when you listen to Lake Effect? You can find us on demand. Find Lake Effect as a podcast wherever you like to listen, to download, and enjoy on the go. In about 15 minutes, we'll hear from some of the women who played the first ever professional women's basketball game right here in Milwaukee.
We were the beginning. We were the pioneers. We were the ones that was going to get things started. That was my hope and dream. And that's how I felt. It was high energy. Great people were there hollering. Everybody was nervous, but it was like a overwhelming, tearful experience for me because a dream came true. I got tears in my eyes now.
Ahead of that story, we'll meet Miss Wisconsin 2025, the first Black woman to hold the title. Keep listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Last year, Racine native Willow Newell was crowned Miss Wisconsin. She's the first Black woman to hold the title. Since she was a teen, Newell says she's been thinking about what embodies Miss America. She joins WUWM race and ethnicity reporter Taryn Powell to talk about her journey through pageant competitions and her advocacy for the arts.
Let's talk about your win, being crowned Miss Wisconsin. What does that feel like?
I still wake up every morning and can't believe that it actually happened. Just because I worked for it for so long. I started competing when I was 14. And, going into the pageant world, you always have the goal of winning the crown, but sometimes it doesn't always end up that way. There were times where I competed as a teenager and as an adult and would get first runner-up or not win the title or not even place. And so having the moment where I actually really made my dreams come true is such an honor. And it's not because of me. I'm so grateful for everyone who has been a part of this journey and supported me along the way.
So started at 14. What piqued your interest? How did you get started?
I knew there were scholarships involved, and a lot of people don't know that the Miss America opportunity is the largest provider of scholarships for young women in the country. And so as Miss Wisconsin, I won $15,000 in scholarships, but going into it as a teen, I knew I wanted to network, to earn some scholarships. And then also, I always had a passion for being on stage and being in the spotlight because I knew that I wanted to highlight diverse stories and people of different backgrounds and cultures. And so I got involved because I knew the Miss America opportunity would give me that chance to be on stage and to be seen and to be heard, and then, of course, to earn those scholarships and those networking skills.
So when you started at 14, what was that first competition? What are the levels?
So we all start on the local level, and I won Miss Racine in November before I was crowned Miss Wisconsin. So there's local pageants throughout the state. Some are open, some you have to live, work, or go to school in that city. And it's really an opportunity for a lot of women who have never competed before to learn what the organization is about. You go into the competition, you compete in evening gown, talent, onstage question, fitness, which a lot of people used to know as swimsuit. They changed it to health and fitness. And then a personal interview with the judges. And through all of those phases of competition, the judges are really looking for who is the most well-rounded, who can represent the organization and themselves on the best level. And it's really all about presenting your unique self like you would be proud of. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for girls to meet each other as well. So that's what I started out as. And then, you go to the state competition. And then after that, you head to the national competition.
What are some of the things that you've learned about yourself on this journey?
I've learned, and I think this is something that it was hard for me to understand as a teen. I've learned that I'm always changing and that there's always something more for me to learn. I think in this position, when you're going on stage, you're told and you want to be your most confident self. And in my mind as a teenager, I thought that meant that I was creating a final product of myself and that I had nowhere else. Like when I went on stage, I would have to be the best version of myself and that there would be nowhere else for me to grow. If that makes any sense. I had a lot of pressure to be perfect. And so I realize now that when I go on stage, I don't have to be perfect or a final version of myself, the finished product. I just have to be willing to be consistent and willing to continue working on myself. So that's what really gave me just this different energy this time when I competed. I have been telling a lot of people that I felt totally different this time when I competed than I did in any previous years. I felt this odd sense of calm because I didn't feel like I had to put on a front. And I didn't know that I was going to do well in the competition. I was kind of just going with the flow. But really something changed inside of me that made me feel like the person I am today has been consistent. I've been showing up for myself. I've been showing up for my community. So I'm willing to do that in the future, and I'm willing to do that as Miss Wisconsin if I'm chosen, and I'm also willing to do that if I'm not chosen.
I don't particularly know much about the pageant life. What I do know is that we don't always hear a lot about or see a lot of Black women, women of color in these competitions. And so I just wonder, what has that been like for you if you were the only one of a handful, like what that experience has been as a Black woman?
It definitely affected my self-esteem going into it. But I feel like my whole life has prepared me for this because I grew up in a lot of predominantly white spaces. Went to PWI schools my whole life. Even from preschool, I remember being the only one in my class and kids asking me questions about my hair or my skin. And then, growing up, going into middle school, going into different competitions like forensics or science Olympiad, where I was always the only one who looked like me. So going into the pageant industry, it wasn't anything that I didn't expect, but it affected my self-confidence at first because I'm watching these videos in middle school and math class and I'm looking at former Miss Americas and I'm thinking I have to be just like them, that I have to reflect the same experiences, that my hair has to look the same. And so I always talk about how my hair journey is so important to me. I love still straightening my hair sometimes now, but at the time that I started competing, I felt like I had to have straight hair and that I had to talk a certain way and that I had to dress a certain way and that there was things about myself that I couldn't share. So I straightened my hair and, I would tend to code switch a lot more, change the octave of my voice when I talked. I would definitely not always share as much of my culture or my experiences. And so I did this a lot because I felt like it was the blueprint for my success. But I think as I came into my womanhood and as I went into college, I just gradually became more comfortable with wearing my hair the way I wanted to, not for the pageants, but just as myself. There was one summer I was like, I'm not getting my hair braided this weekend. I'm just gonna, wear my hair as it is. And then I ended up growing more confident in it. And so I saw people started to actually like it. They complimented me. And it's sad that I had to get to that point as an adult and also wait for people to kind of say, this is okay. But it's something that I feel like we all go through as Black women. You're so worried about what other people think, within our own community, and then also what people think on the outside of our community. And it's really all about just finding what works for you and being patient with yourself because society has so much pressure on us. So being in the pageant industry specifically, looking up to people, not seeing myself, pressured me to be something else, but it became a journey for me of self-love and self-discovery that I had to take. And now I'm so honored I get to represent people on this level and hopefully inspire other people to just be their true selves and represent themselves however they want.
I'm WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter, Taryn Powell, and I'm speaking with Miss Wisconsin winner, Willow Newell.
So winning the Miss Wisconsin competition as the first Black woman to do that, what does that title mean to you?
It's really a dream come true. And I have been trying to really fully comprehend everything that it means, not just to me and my family, but to the entire world. I've received such beautiful messages from people from all over, different organizations, different like BET and different influencers. And I never thought, especially even going into competition week, that my life would change so much or that I'd be able to have such a large influence in such a short amount of time. And so I have made my younger self proud, but I'm also hoping that I can make everyone proud throughout the year. So it's a lot of pressure, every day when I go to an event, I'm like, I have to make sure I'm posting this amount so people can see the impact I'm making and that I'm saying the right things in my interviews and that I'm making sure I share enough of my story so that people can hopefully be inspired. It's a lot, but it's also like a huge blessing. The times when I get stressed or think, am I doing things the right way? I'm like, wow, I'm so blessed that I'm the person who gets to be a part of this and be a part of a larger picture.
How are you making sure to take care of yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. I really appreciate that. I am learning how to take care of myself. I will be meeting with my therapist today, actually. So therapy is always super important. Being able to even just talk to someone. My family has been so supportive. So finding a community. I know not everyone has a huge support from family, whether it be family or friends or just someone you know. That's really what keeps me grounded. If I have a hard day, whether it be I'm doing so much running from one place to another, or if I start to doubt myself or lack confidence, or even those days when I just get really tired, because it does happen. Sometimes, like yesterday was a super long day for me, so I just kind of went home and I passed out. Taking that time to not only tell someone about my feelings, this sounds very cliche, but journaling about it or writing it down, and then taking time to just relax, like to stop doing things. My phone is on Do Not Disturb at a certain time during the day, so I have to tell myself to stop checking emails, stop checking social media, And then to do things I love, that I enjoy, going to the gym. I love working out. I also love listening to music. I watch a lot of anime, so just doing things that I really enjoy kind of keeps me grounded and centered so that when I go back out into the world and do things like go to an event or a festival or a fair, I can be the best version of myself.
You have this community initiative, Expression Without Exclusion. Tell me more about that and how this win, your Miss Wisconsin win, is furthering what you're doing there.
Well, I knew that I wanted to have this community service initiative when I looked back at my childhood, and I remember the first time that I went to the theater and saw my favorite musical, which is Les Mis. And I remember the emotion that I got from this musical. It was the words, it was the music for me. And the special thing about me seeing this was I went to the Racine Theater Guild to see it. So this is a community theater, all volunteer. And I realized how special it is for us to be able to create spaces of art for people who otherwise might not be able to go out and see a show, go to Broadway, go to Chicago. Not everyone can afford a streaming service, so we all can't have that experience that way. And so I wanted to be able to create spaces for people to enjoy art and access art as Miss Wisconsin, and I'm so grateful I get to do that. But my community service initiative is all about going into nursing homes, going into schools. I like to spark creativity in kids at nursing homes, bringing in maybe musical pieces from Disney or just things that they love to hear so that they get a bit of joy in their day from something that's a little bit different and fun.
Yeah.
And then also social media is what I use to reach people and share with everyone why the arts are relevant, because a lot of people, especially now, when we cut funding in schools, we're cutting the arts. They don't think the arts are important. And so I've worked with the Wisconsin Arts Board and also been sharing on social media that the arts are not only influential in our lives when it comes to touching our hearts and allowing us to connect with people, but also it boosts our economy. There are so many people who have jobs outside of the arts who were once influenced by an art teacher or an art class, or were able to express themselves in various ways. So my community service initiative is all about that. It's all about sharing why the arts are important, getting into schools, getting into nursing homes, and then working with the Wisconsin Arts Board to create new plans, because they've been here for so long and they've been working on this to change our communities on a daily basis. So the fact that I get to work with them is such an honor to continue furthering that mission.
But I want to allow some space for you to share any final thoughts you have.
I think this was honestly the perfect interview.
Well.
Seriously, I have been going around and running around, and the questions that you asked made me feel like I could share a lot about myself that I haven't been able to share. So thank you so much.
Willow, I feel like we learned so much. Congratulations, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Willow Newell is Miss Wisconsin 2025, the first Black woman to hold the title. She spoke with WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter Taryn Powell last summer. You can hear more of their conversation at WUWM.com. We'll take one more break, and when we return, we'll meet some of the women who played the first professional women's basketball game right here in Milwaukee. And we'll learn how they paved the way for future female ballers. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. The WNBA 2026 season could be delayed. The league is currently locked in negotiations with the Players Union over a collective bargaining agreement. The players want a higher percentage of the league's revenue. While what happens with this season remains to be seen, the history of the WNBA can be traced right back here to Milwaukee. The first ever pro women's basketball game was played here. While the WBL, or Wisconsin Professional Basketball League, only lasted 3 years, the women from that time reshaped the sport and what was possible for women's basketball. WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez brings us the story of the day women's pro ball got its start.
Nobody people in your peers or their family never talked about the Milwaukee Does during that time?
I have never heard about the Does until until there was this conversation, maybe the idea of like the W expansion came up and people were like, oh, it'd be great to have a team in Milwaukee. And then there was a conversation like, oh, there was a team in Milwaukee.
First inaugural game, December 9th, 78. Ooh, I'm dating myself.
December 9th, 1978. The first ever women's pro basketball game took place right here in downtown Milwaukee. And that's Jerry Booker, star player from that 78 Milwaukee Does team.
I love to jump out the gym. I love playing defense. Defense is my thing. Offense could have been it too, but, I took what they let me have. Put it that way.
Believe it or not, ball was not Jerry's first sport. She loved softball. She says she was always an athlete. Didn't matter what the sport was, honestly. But in high school, she found out that hoops could lead to a college scholarship.
I had graduated from college in 77. I heard they were trying to do a league.
The league was the WBL, the Women's Professional Basketball League.
And one of my friends, she got drafted from the Ohio team. And that's how I heard about it. So I said, let me go try out. Since my childhood friend was traveling that way, I hitchhiked a ride. He dropped me off in Milwaukee, and that was all it.
I was so excited to learn that I'll be talking to the Bandit.
I am so sad that Les Grobstein passed away 3 years ago. He gave me that nickname. He was our radio guy. Anyway, back to my introduction. My name is Elizabeth Galloway McQuitter. I was known for my defensive prowess, a crafty scorer, and I was given the nickname moniker the Bandit by our radio guy, Les Grobstein, because stealing the ball was my forte, and I led the league in steals in that inaugural season.
Liz Galloway McQuitter also played in that first game, but she was traveling up from Chicago. Liz started for the Milwaukee Does opponent, the Chicago Hustle. Such a great name.
So the bus ride was lighthearted and just excited and giddy and just ready to get started, ready to play. We felt prepared. We knew our style of play. We knew what we liked to do. We knew each other. And so it was just a very laid back environment. And then when we saw the crowd, a little nervousness set in, but still mostly excitement and just ready to get going.
The crowd was electric. Almost 8,000 people packed inside the Mecca Arena, home of the world champion Milwaukee Bucks and national champs Marquette Warriors.
The introductions, I remember having chills, standing there in line. And even in college, we were especially in junior college, we were very well known and we won the first national championship. So we received a lot of accolades. But this was on a different level.
A little piece of unknown history. This wasn't just the first ever women's pro game. It was also the debut of the women's ball, the same ball being shot by your favorites today.
Women's professional basketball was on display, and this new basketball was on display, and they both delivered.
While Liz was introduced with the starting lineup for the Hustle, Jerry Booker was coming off the bench for the Does.
I was mad that I didn't start, but it was about the process, getting the win. I was going to take whatever it was because I know the journey that I took to get there. Nobody would have thought I made it. So I took what I was given to me.
At 1:44 in the afternoon, referee Mark Mano, a car salesman from Racine, tossed up the opening tip. 26 seconds later, Milwaukee Does Joni Smith hit the game's first basket to open things up.
The first half was back and forth.
Nerves set in. Up to halftime was kind of sloppy with some very solid play by Waddy and Joni Smith. Cindy Ellis, with the Does, Jerry Booker, very solid play from them.
At halftime, Chicago was up 3, 54-51. Milwaukee was battling, but Chicago's Debbie Waddy-Russo could not be stopped. She already had 19 points and 6 rebounds. In the locker room, the Hustle were confident.
We got this. Just talking about what we need to do better, but excited, got the jitters out, and okay, we got this. This is our game.
Starting the third quarter, Chicago started to take over.
We were running our break. We were known for our fast break. We were getting out on the break. We were playing defense. We were getting steals. We were getting rebounds.
They built the lead up to 13 at the start of the fourth.
Feeling really good until we weren't. Until they came back.
The Doe's youngest player, Baby J, Joni Smith, scored on 4 straight possessions, inside, outside, at the free throw line. She was doing it all. And
she just had a great shot, a great offensive skill set. She just got hot. The tide, the momentum changed, and the tide changed. Now we're in a dogfight.
Jerry Booker didn't start, but she was in there for crunch time. She tied the game up at 81 with just over 5 minutes left on a baseline jumper. The crowd went wild. Journalists covering the game said it sounded like an NBA playoff game. 30 seconds later, Booker was called for a game-changing goaltending call. Pretty soon, the hustle pulled away.
Liz Galloway, she was one of the, handling, controlling of the game and getting Debbie Roddy Russo that ball. She was unbelievable. In the post, shooting outside, whatever.
We made the plays down the stretch and they didn't. They missed free throws, turnovers, and then when we needed the big bucket, it was Waddy.
After 2 hours and 2 minutes of women's pro ball, the hustle beat the Does 92-87. Debbie Waddy Russo, Liz's college teammate, ate the Does up with 30 points and 12 rebounds. But that first game was bigger than who won and lost. It was history, and the women knew it.
What I was thinking of, that I was going to be a star. The league was going to make it. I'm part of the beginning. It was just overwhelming.
We're here. The league is here. The sky's the limit. Here we go. Just everything. But we also stayed in the moment.
Liz says they celebrated in the locker room. High fives and hugs. After all, they did win.
And then, we're coming out. We're signing autographs. So we're like, you want my autograph? That somebody may have that. Might be worth something today.
We were the beginning. We were the pioneers. We were the ones that was going to get things started. That was my hope and dream. And that's how I felt. It was high energy. Great people were there hollering. Everybody was nervous, but it was like a overwhelming, tearful experience for me because a dream came true. I got tears in my eyes now. A dream came true.
So we met when you were in Chicago and I was in Milwaukee. Are you salty at all that the first ever pro women's game was in Milwaukee?
Yeah, right. That's
bit.
another reason why the game happened in Milwaukee is because you need a Chicago-Milwaukee rivalry,
you
right?
need the rivalry.
Yeah, why Milwaukee? You know what I mean? Take it to the big city. But we won, so. I'm Maya Goldberg-Seifer. I grew up playing girls basketball, and I write about women's basketball now.
Basically, how have things changed from how the sport is covered today, where you are doing the work that you're doing, to probably how the Does and the Hustle were covered back then?
I think the way that women's basketball has been covered in the media is one of the most fascinating things to me about the sport. You have all of these women who are playing basketball, have been playing basketball, but oftentimes the people who are telling the stories are very different from those women, right? They are white men in traditional media positions or at traditional media outlets who are telling these stories, not necessarily because they want to at all, right? It's male sports reporters who have been assigned to have to cover women's basketball because, it does exist. The foot they're putting forward, the first reaction that they had was oftentimes being unimpressed.
Like, why aren't we dunking?
Yeah, like, why aren't we dunking? Like, this isn't as good as the men's game. And honestly, right at the time when the WBL started, this is only a couple of years after the passing of Title IX.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that women could play basketball at a professional level, it was unproven until then. And until Title IX, oftentimes women were playing basketball with completely different rules. They were playing a half-court game where women were restricted to playing either offense or defense. It was called rover ball a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't give out, athletic scholarships to women until the passing of Title IX. And so there was some concern at the beginning of the WBL, like, are there going to be enough players that can play at an elite level to participate in this league?
Just to jump in there, like, the thing that I found really interesting was the Bill Byrne, who started the WBL, saw this explosion that was happening after the passage of Title IX and like women's ball and girls ball, like they could actually play not just rover ball, but basketball now. And guess what? They did. They wanted to play. And so everyone's now hooping. And to your point about who was covering the teams, it's interesting thinking about those press pools being all, probably white men who have worked in legacy media, newspaper outlets, as if those weren't toxic back in the day. But also, something I had learned from Mad Seasons and Kara Porter's book, Mad Seasons, was that the original head of marketing, who was a friend of Bill Byrne, really disdained women, like really did not like women. And so you have this person who's promoting the league, who he had quickly stepped out of that role into another role. But the head even of the WBL also didn't think women should be playing ball or have these opportunities or would succeed with these opportunities. So there was even this energy within the league itself that it wouldn't work, that I found really interesting. I think that makes me think of the women. We heard from Liz, we heard from Jerry, and the pressures that they were under at this time. Like, what was their journey like at this time?
So at the time for these women, a lot of the players in the WBL, they were playing in college. They were sort of at the peak of their careers, but it wasn't something that they had necessarily even imagined that they would be able to play professional ball. And so oftentimes they had other jobs. They were working full time or planning the rest of their lives. And this dream of being able to play professionally required them to take an incredible amount of risk, to walk away from stability and to put all of their faith into this dream of playing. And I've heard so many of them say, we were just lucky to play. It was such a dream to get to play. And it's true, it was an incredible achievement, and we stand on their shoulders. And also, they were putting up with so many obstacles and adversity and prejudice at times that I think they were dedicated to playing no matter what, and they had to get through it. So there are a number of teams in the WBL that didn't pay their players, or where the checks would bounce, or the checks were paid, months and months and months later. In New England, the townspeople by the New England Gulls, they ended up bringing the players food because they weren't making enough money to afford their own food. It was a league where really only white players were marketed by the league. It was not a league where Black stars could really be celebrated. In addition to just doing marketing for the league, like having to go out there and try to get butts in seats and justify why women's basketball was worthwhile to people. These were some of the pressures that were on them at the time, that they were doing, that they were going through, in addition to just playing professional basketball.
One more time, Chicago Hustle star, champion, coach, and Hall of Famer, Liz Galloway McQuitter.
The legacy is a generation of firsts. Everybody can't be first. You have in this league the first recipients of Title IX scholarships, 8 members of the first Olympic team, women's basketball Olympic team. You have the women who won the first championships in the AIAW. You have multiple trailblazers. You have scholarships being awarded for the first time, and you have record holders at their universities that all brought this to the league. That's why they were ready to try a league, is because of what we had done in college. And so we will remain that generation of first, and everybody can't lay claim to that. We opened the door, we kicked it open, and we kept it open and have kept it open through our play, through our coaching, through our careers. And it's a sad, sad situation that most of this history remains hidden and unknown, because our handprints are all over the game from that moment to this day.
Here's Milwaukee Doe's legend, WBL All-Star and Hall of Famer Jerry Booker.
I love the fans. The fans was made us want to come back and play every day. Even though we had a terrible record, the fans in Milwaukee were great. I'll never forget that. The only thing I hate when I left in April was snowing. April 79 was snowing in Milwaukee, bad.
Let me see those hands again. Hang on now. Everybody jump, jump, jump.
That story from WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez wraps up today's show. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, simply download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll talk with the candidates running for District 7 Milwaukee County Supervisor. We'll also hear from the candidates on the ballot in the April election throughout the week. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.